I want to start with kind of a story. Maybe a quick, you guys have the emoji button down there for reactions, reaction button. I'm just curious, are you familiar? There we go. I already got a thumbs up. I got a heart. Look at that. Are you familiar with the organization Habitat for Humanity? Is that familiar? It's very familiar in the United States. Some people, yes, some people don't. It's an organization that helps build homes for people who don't have homes, for the homeless, which is an issue in the United States and in a lot of urban and even rural settings. And then they now started doing it around the world. And I kind of asked that question because I had a chance to have a meeting with a guy named Millard Fuller. And Millard Fuller was the founder of Habitat for Humanity, this organization. And it was down in a small town in Georgia, the state, not the country, of Americus, Georgia. And I hoped, because he's a very prominent leader, I was hoping I could get maybe 30 minutes with him, because I had a couple ideas I just really wanted to ask him about. And he was super gracious. I mean, he ended up spending most of the day with me. He took us to show us different Habitat for Humanity homes they built for people, and then turned over the keys and gave them a Bible so they could have a home. He actually took me out to lunch. And then even after he took me out at lunch, then he brought me back to his office and we sat down and he answered all my questions. But the moment I won't forget is when he looked at me across the desk, right in the eye, and he said, "Dave, don't you think everybody deserves a simple, decent place to live?" And he said it with real passion and conviction. Don't you think everybody deserves a simple, decent place to live? Now, there was no disputing the truth of his vision that, yes, everybody deserved a simple, decent place to live. But how you could do that when there was, at that point in time, more than 100 million people, around the world who don't have any shelter at all, I didn't have any idea how to do it. And so then Fuller began to describe his strategy. And part of his strategy was this. He said, I knew with a vision that big, everybody have a simple, decent place to live. I couldn't just be a carpenter by myself. I'd never get the job done. And then he also said, and I knew that I couldn't even start a construction company because that would help, but that wouldn't accomplish this vision. And then he said, I knew I couldn't even become a real estate developer and build, different communities. He said, I knew it had to be something even bigger than that. He said, I had to find a way to mobilize every person who's a follower of Jesus to help them swing a hammer to build homes for people who don't have homes. And that's exactly what he did. And what's fascinating, you could do a little research on it, but this Habitat for Humanity is now the largest home builder in the world, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit. Largest home builder in the entire world. In fact, they've helped build homes for more than 29 million people. 29 million people to have a simple, decent place to live. And it was kind of funny too. I remember him telling me, he said, "Oh, and I think Habitat builds the best homes too." And I was like, "Why is that?" And he said, "Because of the volunteers. We use 3 times as many nails as anybody else." So the question I start with that story because I want to ask, how did that happen? How do you have a vision and then all of a sudden see it grow to that kind of scale? What allowed Habitat for Humanity to actually become a movement? And what did the leaders, maybe more importantly, which are people like you and me, what did the leaders do that created a movement where everyone could have a simple, decent place to live? And I want to give you 2 things in about the next 30 or so minutes that we have together. And I hope these will be really helpful to you. Number 1, they became what I would call a level 5 organization, okay? A level 5 organization. And then secondly, what they did is their leaders were determined not to be the heroes, but they were going to make heroes of everyday people. That was the second thing. Their leaders weren't going to be the heroes, but they were going to make heroes of everyday people. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. I just want to show you something here. Here we go. Let me see if I can get this. Through my work with Exponential, we've done some research on what we call the organizational capacity of churches. And we've come to the conclusion that churches can be grouped into what we call 5 different levels, 5 basic different levels. And I will give you some statistics that apply to each of these levels. that come from the American context. I'll trust you to kind of figure out, okay, how does that apply really in Sweden or in your local context? So what you have is these 5 different levels. Level 1 churches are churches that are in decline. They actually have less people that are on mission, less people saying yes to Jesus this year than last year. So they're in decline. And in the United States, that makes up about 35% of all churches. 35%. I don't know what it would be in your context. Maybe Nicklas might even have some ideas about that, but 35% in the American context. Then you have level 2 churches. Level 2 churches are those churches that are plateauing. You may have added a few people, you lost a few people, but basically you have about the same number of people that are on mission this year as last year. And the percentage of people, churches that are level 2 churches or plateauing churches are, again, about 35%. So 35% level 1, 35% level 2. Then you got level 3 churches, which are growing churches. And you start to see the arrow starting to move up into the right just a little bit. And the growing churches are those people who have more people saying yes to Jesus this year than last year, more people who are on mission this year than last year. And that's the growing level 3 churches. And the remainder of the 30% of the churches would fall into that category. So 35% decline, 35% plateauing, 30% growing. Now, most churches, and this is what I think is part of why I'm excited about talking to you, because I think you get this. Most churches only think in terms of, how do I get to level 3 growing? That's kind of like the height. That's the pinnacle. That's the best we can do. They don't think about these next 2 levels, which I know is Nicklas's heart, and I think the leadership here, and what we want to inspire you to think about. And that is to get to, how do we get to level 4 reproducing, or level 5 multiplying? And I think in a little bit we'll explain, I think that's also consistent with Jesus' vision for the church. So level 4 churches are those churches that are reproducing churches that have ever started a brand new location or a brand new church. Those are reproducing churches. Now in the United States, that makes up about 7% of all churches across all the country would fall into that category. So 7% of the other 100% are also reproducing churches. But I think God's dream for the church is level 5 multiplication. And level 5 is really how you get to movement. It's not just one church, but it's like 4 generations, like 2 Timothy 2:2 of church plant, or Acts 1:8, from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the ends of the earth, movement-making churches. And I think one of the things, as I look back at Habitat for Humanity, that opening example, what they focused on was on multiplication. And that was the vision. And I want to challenge you to do the same thing. Now, as we began to look at level 5 churches, both in the United States, and there's only a handful, but also other places around the world, one of the things we began to zero in on was the leadership of a level 5 church. And in fact, on 2 different occasions, we brought some of the brightest and best thought leaders we could in the church world to Atlanta, just to talk about this, to spend a couple of days just thinking through this. And as we began to look at these level 5 multiplying churches, we said, okay, what are the characteristics? What are the traits? What are the specific practices of leaders in these level 5 multiplying churches? And when we say leaders, we mean not just at the highest level, like the lead pastor or senior pastor, but we mean leaders at every level. So it might be a small group leader, a missional community leader, it might be a student ministry leader, a children's ministry leader, but of the leadership of those churches. And as we made a list of them, and we ended up with about 30 different characteristics, traits. We were just kind of brainstorming as we thought about those churches that we knew that fit this category. And I'll never forget this. As we looked at that list, we kind of stepped back, and one of the guys there, a guy by the name of Dave Rhodes, it wasn't me, he actually made the comment. He said, you know what? These traits, these characteristics of the leadership of level 5 churches, it's almost like they aren't trying to be the heroes. It's like they're making heroes of other people. And again, and Nicklas references, I got a chance to write the book, but someone else actually coined the phrase as, it's like they're hero makers. They're hero makers. And again, then we began to look at the life and leadership of Jesus through that lens. And again, I'm talking about the leadership style of Jesus. And I think if we look at the leadership style of Jesus, Jesus was someone who challenged us as church leaders to create a movement. The last thing he says before he leaves planet Earth in Acts 1:8, he says, this thing's going to start in Jerusalem, and then go to Judea, then Samaria, then the ends of the earth. And no matter how you think about that, whether it's through socioeconomic lines or ethnicity or geography, he's talking about going from here to here to here to here. I mean, Jesus was describing a movement that would bring love and redemption of Jesus' love and redemption to the entire world. So the question then is, okay, so how did he do it? How was he a hero maker? I think one of the places it most stands out is in this verse right here in John chapter 14, verse 12. So imagine this, and you're familiar with this verse, but try to hear it for the first time. Jesus gathered his leaders together there, and he says, very truly I tell you. All right, he's talking to this ragtag group of kind of working class guys and fishermen. He says, whoever believes in me, you guys, you're going to do the works that I've been doing. Now, imagine if Jesus, okay, think about this. Imagine if Jesus was talking to you and he says, hey, you're going to do all the stuff you've seen me do. I mean, it's kind of like, right? But then he even goes more. Look at the rest of the verse. He says, no. In fact, you're going to do greater things than these. And what Jesus was saying in that moment to his closest followers, he was saying, listen, I'm going to train you to reach more people than I ever did. I'm going to train you and show you how you can take the gospel to more places than I ever will. You're going to be the ones, he's telling these guys, he's going to send them out a little bit by two, right? You're going to be the ones that are going to catalyze a movement that's going to, as it's already going to be described in Acts, turn the world upside down, not me. You're going to write the best-selling book, the Bible, not me. You're going to make a far greater impact, and I'm going to see to it, than I ever did in my 3 years of ministry. And I think what we see in this verse is just one example of how through Jesus' leadership style, he was a hero maker. He was a hero maker. Now, occasionally people kind of push back and they'll say, hold it, but isn't Jesus our hero? And absolutely, he's our hero. He stretched out his arms, he died on a cross. But I'm talking about his leadership posture, his leadership style, how he interacted with his followers. He was a hero maker. All right, what does it look like? Let me get I want to get really practical because I want you to make sure you leave with some really good stuff. What does it look like to be a hero-making kind of leader that could lead a level 4, level 5 kind of church, a reproducing, multiplying church? Because you've got it in you, I'm telling you. And this is a mentor of mine, an older guy named Bob Buford. Bob was a guy who actually he made a ton of money in the business world in cable TV. He wrote a best-selling book called Halftime. And Halftime was based on, he had one son, and when his only son tragically died, he went through what he called a halftime experience. He began to really reevaluate everything he did. And he said, the first half of my life was about success. The second half of my life was about significance. And his halftime was going from success to significance. Or you might also say he went from trying to be the hero to being a hero maker, because everything changed in his life. One of the slogans that Bob taught me was this. He said, and I would encourage you to use this. This is kind of the motto for a hero maker. He'd say this: my fruit grows on other people's trees. My fruit grows on other people's trees. Think about that. And one of the things that Bob did is he started an organization called Halftime, based on that book, for business leaders to help them make that shift from just being successful to being significant. He also started another organization called Leadership Network that was for church leaders to help them really make the most impact they possibly could. And one of the things Bob would tell both organizations that he started, whether it's for Christian business leaders or whether it was for Christian church leaders, he would say this. He'd say, we're the platform, we're not the show. We're the platform, we're not the show, which is also the way hero makers think. One of the simple practices that Bob had is he would carry in his pocket. Maybe some of you want to start doing this. Like in his front pocket here, or sometimes in his wallet, a 3x5 card, just a simple blank card. And he'd have the names of 10, 11, 12 younger emerging leaders written on those cards, on that card. And those are the people that he was intentionally investing in, both relationally and financially. And for a while, I got to be one of those people. And he, even though Bob recently passed away, I continue to talk about Bob, and I feel like Bob's fruit is growing on my trees because of the investment that he made in me. Let me give you one more example of a hero maker, and this one is a little different. This is Shalane Flanagan. Excuse the American flag there. I don't know. Give me a little reaction. Do we have any distance runners? Any people who like running, who like outdoor running, or am I going to be the only one? Oh, there we go. Okay. I see a couple people waving at me. Or there we go. Okay. Good. All right. Let me give you a little context. Shalane Flanagan won the New York City Marathon in 2017. Now, this was a big deal, and she's a great example of a hero maker. But this is a big deal because no female American had won the New York City Marathon in 40 years. All right, 40 years. So it was always, the Kenyans and the Ethiopians are always faster, and so they were always winning. No American had won it in 40 years. After she won the New York City Marathon, and this is her in 2017, right after that, the New York Times wrote an article. Now, I want you to listen to this as a church leader. Listen to the way that they describe her, okay? It said, when Shalane Flanagan won the New York City Marathon last week, this is written in the New York Times, her victory was about more than just an athletic achievement. Of course, it's a remarkable one. She's the first American woman to win in 40 years in a blistering time of 2 hours and 26 minutes. For any of you, I've run a couple marathons. Any of you that run a marathon, that is unbelievably fast, first of all. But now listen to what they say next. Perhaps Shalane Flanagan's bigger accomplishment, though, lies in how she nurtures and promotes the rising talent around her. A rare quality in the cutthroat world of elite sports. Listen to this next paragraph. I love this about her. Every single one of her training partners, all 11 women in total on Team Nike, have made it to the Olympics while training with her. An extraordinary feat. Imagine that, Nicklas. Imagine if everybody who just got close to you became an Olympian. That's what's going on. And they actually named it. They call it the Shalane effect. How about if they had a Nicklas effect or a Dave effect? Wouldn't that be awesome? I'm going after great things, but anybody who comes with me, I'm going to make sure they accomplish great things. The rest of the article, it says, she serves as a rocket booster for the careers of women who work alongside her while catapulting forward herself. And again, listen to this, church leaders, and see it. Man, there's so much to learn here. Shalane has pioneered a brand of team mom to these young and up-and-comers with the confidence not to tear others down or to just protect her place in the hierarchy. I'm telling you, that'll preach. Now, let me hang out here just for a little bit because I love this story. So that was 2017. 2018, right? Now, no female American has won the Boston Marathon in 33 years. No female American, that's the next year, has won the Boston Marathon in 33 years, right? What do you think Shalane does? If you guess that she wins, you guessed wrong. And here's why. Because she's a hero maker. Here's what she does. I love this story so much. She puts her arm around I wish I had a picture of her, another female runner named Des Linden. Des Linden was this runner who had a great career, but always finished second, never finished first in the big one. She puts her arm around Des Linden and says, Des, now it's your turn. Now it's your turn. It is the worst weather. It's raining, it's cold, it's windy. It's the worst conditions ever in Boston Marathon history. They run together. Go Google this if you want. They run together, so much so they actually both stop and go to the bathroom together. But they run the whole thing together. Flanagan supporting her, and Des Linden, after Shalane telling her, Des Linden wins and becomes the first female American to win the Boston Marathon in 33 years. Now, this becomes kind of a big deal in the States. And women are so inspired by Shalane all across the country that when it came to the 2020 Olympic trials, the time trials to get in for the Olympic marathon, the number of women who qualified for the Olympic time trials in 2020 versus 2016 was over 500. It was four times as many in 2020 as 2016. And when they asked the running community, why are so many women suddenly running marathons at such a high rate and doing so well? They all said it's the Shalane effect. And what I love about, and it's not a surprise, you know, she recently retired, and guess what she's doing? She's coaching other runners. And I haven't met Shalane yet. I tell this story all over the world. I'm going to meet her. But I tell this story because I think it's such a great example of someone who is a hero maker. All right. I got a little excited about that. Now let's go back to the church world specifically. All right. And the key question that you need to ask yourself, if you want to become the leader of a level 4 or level 5 church or an organization, is this question. Am I trying to be the hero where the spotlight's always on me, where I'm always the one on the platform? Or am I trying to make heroes of others? Am I trying to make heroes of others where my fruit grows on other people's trees? I'm nurturing and developing the rising talent around me. I create platforms, I let other people stand on them. This slide right here, if you want, actually, if you want, you can just take a picture of this slide and then you don't have to even buy the book. Because because what we did is we took, there you go, I see some people taking their phone out. You're going to save some money. That's good. That's good. Go ahead and please take it. Yeah. I'll send you all the slides or whatever you want too. Nicklas, we can talk about that. So we took those 25 or 30 traits that we had in Atlanta of hero-making leaders. And we said, okay, we want to give this to people in a way that they can really grab a hold of it and put it to use. So we pared it down to the top five practices of hero-making leaders. And these are the top five. And I'm watching my clock here. I'm gonna move a little faster here because I would love to give you just a little bit on each of these five, so at least whet your appetite and you can begin to do these. Practice number one. And I'm going to ask you for a little participation. If this feels like you're in children's church, I apologize, but it will help you remember it. I promise. Okay. So here's the first one: multiplication thinking. Everybody point to your head. Go ahead and point to your head. Come on, everybody. There you go. That's it. Yes. Thank you very much. Good job. Thanks. For you to be a hero maker, there has to be a shift in how you think. That's where it starts, a shift in how you think. And you can see where it says the hero thinks ministry happens through my leadership, which is good. But the hero maker, and this is better, okay, it's better, thinks ministry happens through multiplied leadership. And see, even Jesus, okay, go back to Acts 1:8. When he cast vision for taking the gospel to the ends of the earth, he didn't imagine that he was going to do it. In fact, 3 different times in Acts 1:8, he says, you're going to be my witnesses, right? You're going to be the ones who are going to take this to the ends of the world. You. Multiplication thinking, I want you to get this part, is often catalyzed by a compelling cause, a greater battle, or a bigger dream. A bigger dream. So here, what I would love to do in the next 5 minutes is I would love to expand your dream. Because if you don't have a big, maybe jot this down or at least remember it. If you don't have a dream that makes you dependent on God, you need to get a bigger dream. Because you'll never move towards multiplication thinking. You'll never need to be a hero maker. If you don't have a dream that makes you dependent on God, you need to get a bigger dream. I remember a specific incident when this happened for me. I was a younger leader, and listen to the way I say this. The vision I had for my church was I wanted my church to grow to 1,000 people, right? I thought maybe I could teach well enough to hold the attention of 1,000 people, or I thought maybe I could kind of organize and create the infrastructure of getting people into, 100 small groups of 10 each, and that would be 1,000 people. I was sitting in a workshop with Neil Cole, and Neil Cole said, here's what I want you to do. Take the current dream for your church. And so I thought to myself, okay, 1,000 people. I want to have 1,000 people. That's my current dream. He says, take that dream and now multiply it times 1,000,000. 1,000 times 1,000,000. Carry the 1, the 0. I'm going, okay, 1 billion. 1 billion. And he said this. He said, now what I want you to do, don't try to figure out how to accomplish your dream. I want you to figure out how to accomplish that dream. How would you accomplish the dream of 1 billion people? Which, by the way, is a lot closer to what the vision that Jesus had of Acts 1:8 anyway. And so suddenly, as I'm trying to figure out how to create a church that could actually reach 1 billion people, I knew, and think about Millard Fuller, the way Millard thought about Habitat for Humanity. I knew I couldn't do it by myself. And I knew I couldn't do it through one church. That I was going to have to multiply my efforts. I was going to have to train up lots of people to plant lots of churches. I was going to have to probably work across denominational lines now too, right? I can't just stay within my own little tribe. Anybody that loves Jesus and Jesus Lord, we got to work together. And all of a sudden, it just changed my paradigm of leadership. And what happened is I knew I couldn't be the hero. I knew my church couldn't be the hero. I knew my denomination, my tribe couldn't be the hero. I was going to have to work through lots and lots of people to make this happen. I was going to have to make this shift. And this is what multiplication thinking did, to becoming a hero maker. And I think part of the reason that maybe God's favor has been on some of the things we've been a part of, like we have a church that has many locations across Chicago. Each of them have a community pastor. And we have a church planting network that, is close to 6,000 churches. And each of them have a pastor who is committed to reproducing and those things. I think if you can get this in your head, everybody wants to be a hero, but few people understand the power of hero making. Every person in your church, they want to do heroic things. There's just not enough people going like, yeah, I'm going to do everything I can to help you do heroic things. And so the first shift, okay, needs to be a shift in how you think. And it's multiplication thinking. Ministry best happens through multiplied leadership. All right, keep moving. Number 2, point to your eyes. Okay, point to your eyes. Go ahead and point to your eyes. This is a shift in how you see the world. Okay, how you see the world, a shift in how you see. And I think we see this in the life of Jesus. He comes to this group of ragtag working class fellows, and he says, come follow me. Come follow me, he says to them. They never expected that a rabbi would see something in them worth investing in. That they never expected that a rabbi like Jesus would see the potential in them to teach them and lead them. But Jesus saw in that group that group of 12, they could change the world. I remember when I was in middle school, I went to a summer camp, and there was a guy at the summer camp named Dennis Gamoff. Now, you won't know Dennis Gamoff because nobody knows Dennis Gamoff, but Dennis Gamoff was a big deal to me. And here's why. Because I loved basketball as a little guy, and Dennis Gamoff had been a high school basketball All-American. Dennis Gamoff had played, big-time college basketball, and now he was at my little camp. And I remember playing softball with Dennis Gamoff, and I was just like in awe. He was such an incredible athlete, right? I left the softball field. I'm walking across the camp back to the cafeteria, and all of a sudden I feel this big hand on me. And I turn around, and guess who's there? Dennis Gamoff. And in that moment, Dennis says to me, he says, Dave, I see in you somebody who could be a really good leader. I'll tell you what, middle school, that's a long time ago. And I still remember those words where he said, Dave, I see in you. Here, in the book, what we do is we give you these 5 practices, but we also give a simple tool so you can implement this right now. The second practice of permission giving, where you see something in other people. Here's in the English alphabet, The four most important letters of the English leadership alphabet are these: I, C, N, U. Those four letters, I, C, N, U. And I encourage leaders, have what we call ICNU conversations. So, you know what? I see in you someone who could be a great worship leader. I see in you someone who could be a great teacher. I see in you someone who could be a great student ministry leader. I see in you. And chances are the reason that you're on this call is because somewhere at some time, somebody had that kind of a conversation with you, that they believed in you before you believed in yourself, that they saw something in you that maybe you didn't even see in yourself. Maybe they even gave you a chance before you should have, because they saw the potential. And this is true for level 4, level 5 churches, and the kind of leaders, hero-making leaders. Instead of just saying, I want to see what God can do through my own leadership, look at that hero maker. It says, I see what God can do through others, and I let them know what I see in them. All right, practice number 3. So there's multiplication thinking, permission giving. Put your hand on your heart. Put your hand on your heart, okay? The third shift is you shift in what you share. Instead of just sharing what you know, now, this is the difference in hero-making leaders. Heroes will share what I learned to add more followers, but hero makers, they share, I would change that even now. I think I'd change it. They would share their life to multiply disciples up to the 4th generation. They share their life up to multiply disciples up to the 4th generation. And again, we see this in the life of Jesus. Jesus spent 3 years with primarily 12 people. And if you think about the Gospels, let me ask you this. Do you envision Jesus mostly spending his time with the crowds and the masses, like the Sermon on the Mount, the feeding the 5,000? Or do you envision him spending time with just the 12, the few, the disciples? We actually went back and did kind of homework on this. In the Gospels, if you divide all the Gospels up into just events, 73% of Jesus's time, according to the Gospels, was spent with just the 12. And 27% was with the crowds. And you think about that now, how we do church. Most of what we do is we spend all of our energy getting ready for the crowd on Sunday, right? Where Jesus, it was about 1/4 of his time, but 3/4 of his time was invested in the few. And I think that's what it takes to be a hero maker. You share your life, okay, to multiply disciples. All right, let's go to practice number 4. So you got multiplication thinking, permission giving, disciple multiplying. Put your hands out like this. Very good. Now the hero, and again, you look at that column where it says hero, that's a good thing. It's just not a great thing. The hero says, God bless the use of my gifts. But the hero maker, and I think there's a maturing that has to take place before you get to be a hero maker. You do this. I ask God to bless the leaders I'm sending out. Instead of just bless me, no, I'm blessing the leaders that I'm sending out. And that's exactly what we see in Matthew 28. Jesus spends 3 years, right? He's got this multiplication thinking in Acts 1:8, the permission giving, hey, come follow me, disciple multiplying, he's hanging out with them, right? And then when they're ready, after 3 years, what does he do in Matthew 28? He says, all authority has been given to me. Now I'm giving it to you. You go. And he sends them out. It's the great commissioning. Go get them. And so he's fully activating their gifts. I remember when I was in Nairobi at Nairobi Chapel with Bishop Oscar Muru. He asked me to come, and he's a part of a new thing, and I was speaking. But before I got up to speak, Bishop Oscar invited 31 men and women to come to the stage, and I didn't know what was going on. At first, I thought it was like the choir, but it wasn't the choir. This was 31 men and women who'd gone through their Canara leadership program, who'd been apprenticed by other people, other church leaders, and they were getting ready to commission all of them and send them out to plant churches in Kibera, now the slums of Nairobi. And it was such a tremendous experience. I'd never seen that many church planters commissioned all at once. But 31 men and women, and Pastor Oscar explains to everybody that they'd been trained, and now they were commissioning them to go plant churches. And he reaches out his hand like this, and he asks everybody in the church to reach out their hand. He says a prayer of blessing over them, and they commission them. And that Sunday, they sent them out. And I want you to look at these practices, because what they do is they actually build on each other. The first one is you're thinking differently, you got a bigger dream. The second one is you look out in your church and you go like, wow, these people have potential. I see in you. Ephesians 2:10 calling. And then you find ways to begin to spend time with them and other people to spend time with them, to develop their gifts, just like Jesus did for those 3 years. And then the fourth one, this gift activating, and this is where we get it wrong sometimes. They are not there to be your perpetual assistant. They're not there to be your associate forever. They're not there to be just your right-hand person. No, your job is to fully activate their gifts. And when they're ready to go lead a ministry, to go lead a church, to go whatever it is that they can do to further the kingdom, you bless them and you trust God to send somebody else to replace them and raise them up. You fully activate their gifts. You commission, you send them out. And I could talk more about that, but I'll give you the last one. The last one is this, is kingdom building. So you got multiplication thinking, permission giving, disciple multiplying, gift activating, right? Not just bless me, bless others, but do like this with your hands, like you're counting. This is the last one, okay? And this is kingdom building. When it's all done, and this is another big shift, and this is how you move from what I call level 3, that level 3 kind of church, to a level 4 or 5. Instead of the hero wants to count the number of people who show up to my thing. How many people came to my student ministry? How many people came to my small group? How many people attend my church? And that's not bad. It's just hero kind of thinking. But the hero maker, here's how you count. A change in the scoreboard. You count the leaders instead who you send out to do God's thing. You count the number of leaders you send out to do God's thing. I mean, think about Jesus. After he sent out his 12 disciples, I mean, he had nobody in his small group. I mean, if the way we count, that would be like, oh man, I'm a failure. No, that's not a failure. That's what we're supposed to be doing. I'll wrap up with this story, and then we can do a little bit of questions if we have time. I remember I looked at my calendar and my schedule, and it said I had a meeting with a guy named Sam. I didn't know who Sam was. So I asked my assistant, Pat, I said, hey, Pat, who's Sam I'm supposed to be meeting with? And she said, truthfully, I don't know. I know it's a guy from India, and actually he's already here. He's downstairs waiting on you. And I was a little bit aggravated because my assistant, Pat, she makes my schedule. I'm like, how come I have an appointment with somebody and you don't even know who it is? But she's a tough lady, and she's like, well, he's here, so you better get down there and go talk to him. So it's like, all right. So I go downstairs, put my hand out. You know, pastors, you put on your happy face, going like, hey, Sam, how you doing? Tell me your story. And so Sam starts telling me his story. And he's a super humble guy. And he said, back in the 60s, my dad started a church planting ministry in India. And from the mid 60s to about 1992, they planted 200 churches. And I was like, wow, 200 churches. That's awesome. So now I'm like glad I'm meeting Sam, right? I mean, that's spectacular. And again, he's a super humble guy. So I'm gonna have to drag every detail. I said, well, what happened in 92? He said, well, actually in 92, he said, I was over at my mom and dad's house. We were having a really good time together as a family. My mom went to bed. My dad and I stayed up late in the night talking. He said, the last thing I said to my dad before he went to bed, the last thing my dad said to me, rather, Sam told me, before he went to bed, I left, he said, son, whatever you do, don't lose the vision. Don't lose the vision. And I took off, and my dad actually got very sick that night. In fact, so sick they had to take him to the hospital. And they took him to the hospital. He went into a coma, and he actually never came out of it, and he died. And so the last thing my dad said to me was, son, don't lose the vision. So I ended up taking over the ministry back in the early 90s. And I began to do a few things a little differently. One of the things I did differently is I asked all of our church planters every year to not only lead the church that they planted, but also bring someone alongside you that you would apprentice, that you would train to plant a church the next year. So every year you lead your church, but you also train someone and then you release them to go plant a church. And then the next year you lead your church, but also in addition to that, you're also discipling somebody you bring alongside you and you release them, activate their gifts, commission them to plant a church. And so I asked them to do that every year. So I was like, so you've been doing that since the early 90s? He said, yeah. I said, so I'm going like, well, how's it going? Sam just casually replies to me. He says, well, we now have about 70,000 churches. I'm not making this up. I mean, I think my face must have just went white. And I was like, how many people does that represent? He said, about 3.5 million. And I think he must not have thought I was impressed, because then he says, oh, but our prayer is for 100,000 churches and 5 million people. Well, I don't know how it all happened, but Sam I'm talking about is actually Sam Stevens of the India Gospel League. And I was with Sam a couple months ago, and they've now planted more than 100,000 churches. More than 100,000 churches. All right, how did that happen? How'd that happen? And I'll tell you, if you meet Sam, he is not a great communicator. He's not a charismatic kind of leader. But he's a guy who doesn't have to be the hero, but instead, he's a hero maker. And think about what were these 5 practices. He's a guy who's applied multiplication thinking. No, we're going to try to plant 100,000 churches. He's got a big dream. He's a guy who's permission giving. He told all of his church planters, every year, I want you to find an apprentice and tell them, I see this in you, that in this year, we're going to help you plant a church. And then you're going to live, like disciple multiplying. You're going to apprentice them throughout the year. And they're not going to just be your associate. They're not just your right-hand person. They're not just your assistant. But at the end of that year, then you're going to fully activate their gifts to help them go start a brand new church. And when you think about kingdom building, when I asked Sam, so how's it going? He didn't tell me how many people were in his church. In fact, Sam, he probably leads a very small church, relatively speaking. Instead, what he told me, no, here's how many churches we planted. And here's how many people those churches are reaching. And I guess I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be with you, but I just want to leave you at that. Church, as a church, our churches were created for movement. We were created for a movement. And we have everything we need to do it. And I think one of the key things is if we can say, okay, I'm not going to be the hero, but instead I'm going to make heroes of all the people that God's put around me.